Next up, we'll get this pun out of the way real quick. We have the daunting prospect of going over, well, Crawdaunt. Pokemon's version of SpongeBob's Mr. Krabs has been with us since the 3rd generation. And look, I know Crawdaunt is a crawfish, but it looks more like Mr. Krabs than the actual crab Pokemon to me. So yeah. And perhaps its dark typing is commentary on the evils of grubbing money in one's big, meaty claws. Also, I'm sure you remember Ash's Corphish during Pokemon Advance, though it didn't evolve into a Crawdaunt, unfortunately. Anyways, today we'll see if Crawdaunt vice-gripped the competitive scene. So, how good was Crawdaunt actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Crawdaunt's meaty attack stat alongside Swords Dance or Choice Band looks promising, but it's held back from any kind of success in its debut generation's OU due to its absolutely awful bulk and speed, meaning it got very little opportunity to safely get on the field and would get chased out quickly without having done much damage owing to its lack of physical stab. It was severely outdone by other physical attackers like Heracross, and in UU, Crawdaunt couldn't hack it too well either, for the exact same reasons. One was better off using Scyther as a Swords Dancer or Kangaskhan as a Choice Bander. Now, Crawdaunt did have a decent special attack stat from which it could fire some good stab attacks like Surf and Crunch with a strong Ice Beam to deter grass types, but there was another Water Dark type in the tier, Sharpedo, which was a wholly superior choice by virtue of being notably stronger and faster. Thus, Crawdaunt was doomed to drop to depths even lower, finding itself in NU. There, the surroundings were hospitable enough for it to finally show off its power. The Pokemon were generally slower and weaker, so Crawdaunt was able to actually get onto the field. It wasn't fast enough to consistently sweep with Swords Dance, but with Choice Band, its immediate power made it a wall breaker that was incredibly difficult to switch into, thus letting it take up the mantle of one of the tier's best hit and run Pokemon. It was especially good because it was a physical attacker that utterly crushed the otherwise tough to break wall Tangela with Sludge Bomb or Ice Beam, the latter also pounding Graveler and otherwise threatening just about the entire tier between Brick Break for Mawile, Rocks and Normals, Hidden Power Ghost for Haunter, and Return or Double Edge for vicious neutral coverage. Speaking of Mawile, Mawile could use Baton Pass to safely get Crawdaunt in without worrying about its frailty, though the prominence of Chimecho meant Crawdaunt usually found its way in anyway. Crawdaunt could also run a special set, which was terrific at catching physical walls off guard, and could even run Taunt alongside its stabs and Ice Beam to make sure walls couldn't recover. Crawdaunt had finally found its calling in NU, and was one of the tier's flagship offensive Pokemon. The 4th generation brought some nice boosts for Crawdaunt. It could finally gain stab on its physical attacks, and Life Orb meant it could boost all of its moves without the restriction of Choice Band. It still had no chance in OU due to the laughable extent of how miserable its speed and bulk were, but there seemed to be hope for UU this time around, especially once Heart Gold and Soul Silver arrived and gifted it Dragon Dance, which made it even stronger while seemingly fixing the issue of its awful speed, but only seemingly, because as menacing as a Life Orb Crawdaunt with +1 attack and speed is, it was still pathetically slow after a Dragon Dance. Without a Jolly Nature, it would still get outsped by Houndoom, Mismagius, and Scyther, and it really needed to use Adamant, because UU walls, namely Milotic, as well as Weezing and Tangrowth, would not go down easily, and Crawdaunt really needed to play to its strength, literally. It was also still incredibly frail, which not only meant it struggled to find opportunities to switch in, but meant its sweep would easily be cut short by the many priority moves flying around UU. Choice Band meant Crawdaunt had more immediate damage to immediately dish out, but it was incredibly reliant on making the right prediction so its attack wouldn't get stuffed, and it still struggled to get in. Crawdaunt was technically viable, but way too difficult to use for way too marginal of a reward. Most of the time it felt like an inferior Feraligatr, and thus it didn't see regular play in UU. Falling to NU once more. There, the presence of Slowking as a necessary check to Charizard, as well as Hypno being common, meant Crawdaunt had plenty of opportunity to switch in and dish out fierce, tough-to-wall Choice Banded assaults, not messing around with any fancy setup that would likely cause less damage than the immediacy of Choice Band. Crawdaunt was also especially fierce on Trick Room teams, which were quite solid in NU, and loved turning Crawdaunt's awful speed into a great weapon. The tier's lack of solid dark resist and general overall fragility meant Crawdaunt's crunch was able to consistently leave its mark in most games it played, and it was known once more as one of NU's offensive juggernauts. Crawdaunt got another tremendous boost in black and white in the form of the adaptability ability, which jacked up the power of its already fearsome stabs to downright dizzying heights. OU still blew right past it, as did UU, with its resemblance to the previous generation's OU, but Crawdaunt settled into the new RU as one of the most vicious wall breakers around. The prominence of walls like Crawdaunt used as an entry point, such as Slowking, Cryogonal, Yuxi, and Steelix, meant it was able to consistently come in and throw out monstrous choice band attacks, which is a more efficient way of using Crawdaunt than the Dragon Dance set, which comparatively lacked power and was easily revenge killed. Even the unbelievably bulky Alomomola and Tangrowth were potentially 2-hit KO'd by Banded Crutch after Stealth Rock, which is an absolutely ridiculous feat of raw power. Superpower made sure Ferocity wasn't going to stand in Crawdaunt's way, and even put a severe chunk into Poliwrath, which appeared on many of the tier's best stall teams, just to stop Crawdaunt from instantly destroying them. It was truly an unwallable Pokemon, and while it was usually relegated to death fodder duty against most fast offensive teams, its ability to deal with defensive cores so well freed up its teammates to focus more on the offensive side of the metagame. Plus, the fact was that most of the best teams in the RU metagame had at least one slow, bulky Pokemon, even on offensive teams. Slowking was a popular choice, and so was Choice Band Aggron, which would be all Crawdaunt needed to grab a KO. It could even retaliate against a Choice Band locked Entei that KO'd one of Crawdaunt's teammates with Flare Blitz, by then KOing one of Entei's teammates. Overall, Crawdaunt was a Pokemon that made most opponents groan when seeing it in team preview, as they knew with most teams they were packing that it'd find its way in and take one of their Pokemon out before they could respond. Then everything fell into place for Crawdaunt in Gen 6. Fairy types resisting its dark stab were certainly a pain, but everything else worked out exactly in its favor. Knockoff received an immense buff, as if its newfound strength wasn't enough. But this basically meant no wall switching into Crawdaunt was going to be gaining leftovers recovery, which meant even resists like Clefable would be crippled. Knockoff was also buffed in the sense that steel types no longer resisted dark, meaning Crawdaunt could blow past them more easily. This was especially notable against Ferrothorn. Finally, Crawdaunt got a move it'd been aching for generations, Aqua Jet, which was tremendously powerful priority that bypassed Crawdaunt's awful speed, threatening common Pokemon like Tornadus T and Choice Scarf Landorus T. Crawdaunt's water and dark coverage was now so good that its Choice Band set could now run exclusively its stabs, not just Crabhammer, Knockoff, and Aqua Jet, but also Crunch as a secondary dark stab for a stronger Pokemon against a Pokemon who had already had its item removed, while also making sure Mega Venusaur would not be able to wall it. Now you might be thinking, alright, that sounds pretty scary, but how did Crawdaunt actually switch in? Surely OU just got faster and stronger, which meant Crawdaunt's low speed and bulk just got worse. That was true. But Crawdaunt was easily switched into battle when paired with the already excellent combination of Volt Switch Rotom Wash and the tier's many U-turn users, such as the aforementioned Therians as well as Mega Scizor. These Pokemon attracted and used their switch move on members of the opposing team that Crawdaunt could threaten with a KO, thus smashing something on the opposing team. For example, Rotom and Tornadus often attracted Clefable, whose standard set crumpled to Crabhammer. Rotom also invited in Amoonguss, who would have to run in fear of Crawdaunt's knockoff, and Mega Scizor forcing in Heatran meant that Heatran would quickly be forced to make an uncomfortable decision. Crawdaunt was specific to these kinds of teams, but it really made them tick. It was basically unwallable, and as such was worth the effort its teammates would make to get it in safely. Swords Dance sets were also sometimes used on heavily offensive teams, as they were potential game enders against common balanced teams, especially since their catch-all revenge killer, Scarf Tyranitar, stood absolutely no chance against Aqua Jet, but the Choice Band variance's immediacy made it more consistent in a great number of scenarios. Its brutal instant power was what truly defined Crawdaunt's first ever stint in OU, seeing usage from top players in the most important tournaments because it was just that terrifying. Sometimes Rotom Wash even ran a significant amount of speed EVs just to make sure they could outspeed Jolly Crawdaunt, which was a testament to how seriously Crawdaunt was taken as a threat. Now, as mentioned before, Crawdaunt may have been one of the most fearsome Pokemon in OU, but it was still a very specific Pokemon that couldn't be slapped onto just any team, and as such it ended up in UU. There it was slightly held back by Chestnut being a hard counter to both of its stabs, that is until Crawdaunt slotted Aerial Ace as its fourth move on the Choice Band set, and reassured the entire metagame that there was nothing out there that could truly wall it, while also making short work of any Whimsicott that had ideas of taking one hit from either stab. The problem with dropping Crunch was that knockoff would not threaten Alomomola after leftovers had been removed, so it was a bit of a give and take. However, Crawdaunt could even run Switcheroo in the last slot to ensure that it would always leave a significant mark if the opposing team was too bulky or had too many fat resistances that would be exceedingly difficult to predict around, as a choice banded wall like Alomomola was utterly useless. And as far as difficulty switching into Crawdaunt with non-super defensive teams were concerned, some might say, what about Hydreigon, the best Pokemon in UU? Hydreigon resists both Crawdaunt's stabs and has Roost, which in theory seems nice until you look at the damage calculator and stare dumbfounded at the sheer damage Crawdaunt dishes out with a resisted attack against a naturally bulky Pokemon. And spoiler alert, it does way more than Roost can consistently heal off, especially with Stealth Rock. Similar to OU's Volt Turn strategy, Rotom Mow and Infernape's Volt Switch and U-Turn combination allowed Crawdaunt to come in safely, thus letting it make use of its stunning power on a consistent basis. Crawdaunt's powerful Aqua Jet was also severely threatening to many of the tier's scariest offensive Pokemon, such as Mega Aerodactyl, so with careful use, it could even accomplish something significant against fast offensive teams. Overall, the 6th generation was an absolutely terrific one for Crawdaunt, having its first legitimate role in OU and being a bona fide UU Pokemon for the first time as well. Crawdaunt didn't have a real niche in VGC at all, but we did find 2 placements for it, though we didn't really find anything else. These trainers seem to crave the forceful effect of its incredible power, and props to them for succeeding with it, and I apologize if I butcher both of your names. In 2015, Evan Feroy used it to reach 7th at the Oregon Regionals, and in 2016, Dinesh Selva Kumar reached 6th with it at the Sydney Regionals, so well done to both. And look, I know I say this like every video, but unfortunately, Crawdaunt wasn't able to shine in OU again with the prominence of the Tapus, especially Tapu Bulu and Feeny. Pokemon like Kartana with a better matchup against more of the metagame were preferred as wall breakers, and Ash Greninja was most players' go-to pick for Water Dark offense. However, in UU, Crawdaunt was more fearsome than ever. Swords Dance boosted moves coming from a high attack stat are scary, and are utter powerhouses when upgraded into Z moves, and with adaptability topping it off, they are downright terrifying. Crawdaunt's Hydro Vortex utterly slaughtered just about everything that wasn't immune to it. The resistant Primarina and the ludicrously tanky Mega Aggron dropped after a Swords Dance. It didn't need an SD to be scary either. If the opponent had faster but frailer answers to Crawdaunt such as Hydreigon and Rotom Mow, it could simply blow them up on the switch, with Aqua Jet as a backup to ensure the KO. In fact, Hydro Vortex was so powerful that it didn't matter that Unaware Quagsire ignored Crawdaunt's Swords Dance boost, since it would get crushed anyways. The Choice Band set was, as always, incredibly fearsome, especially with a bevy of U-turns and Volt Switches that could bring it in safely. And to put it mildly, Sun and Moon UU Crawdaunt was one scary crawfish. And that's it. So how good was Crawdaunt actually? Unfortunately, it had many traits that held it back from being able to get use out of its fearsome attack stat, so its first few generations saw it in the lower tiers, though it was quite fearsome in those and kept growing in strength until it made a huge jump up and saw genuine OU usage in Generation 6, while becoming excellent in UU, both there and in the following generation. Overall, Crawdaunt hasn't been a high tier superstar, but it's definitely had its place, and anything that's ever had to eat its crab hammer will tell you it's a painful experience. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Crawdaunt? How would you improve it? Do you think it's good the way it is? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. And to vote for next week's Pokemon, leave a comment on the latest community post that should go up around the same time or a little bit after this video's release, and comment on which Pokemon you want next. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.